The story we're about to explore has taken an unexpected turn, and honestly, it demands a moment of real reflection. When this defamation suit first surfaced, with Candace Owens at the center, many dismissed it as another headline-grabbing media spectacle. Others, including myself, didn't grasp just how serious, layered, and unpredictable this situation would become. Now, after months of courtroom filings, public reaction, and some surprising new developments, we've reached a pivotal moment. And here's the twist: it looks like many of the people warning about this case from the start were absolutely right. For a long time, there was a sense that this was just another battle in the ongoing war of online personalities and influencers. A conflict of ideologies played out in headlines, thumbnails, and social media soundbites. But behind the noise, a real legal dispute has been brewing, and it's turning into something far more complicated, far more consequential than originally expected. This video isn't just an update, it's an acknowledgement. Because now, with new court documents, expert commentary, and public statements revealing even more layers, the phrase "you were right, I was wrong" doesn't just feel appropriate, it feels necessary. Whether you're someone who supported Candace Owens from the beginning, or someone who doubted the impact of this case, the latest facts will likely challenge your perspective. So buckle up, because over the next few chapters, we're diving deep into everything you need to know: how this all started, how it spiraled, and where it might be headed next. This isn't just a legal update, it's a shift in the narrative. And it might just change how we all think about defamation in the digital age. To understand how we got here, we have to go back to the very beginning, before the lawyers, before the subpoenas, and long before the headlines blew up. At the center of this story is Candace Owens, a high-profile political commentator and media personality known for her bold stances and often controversial statements. She's no stranger to public debates, but this particular legal confrontation is different because it hinges not just on opinion, but on the legal definition of truth, damage, and responsibility. It all began when Owens made a series of remarks on her podcast and social platforms referencing another public figure, someone she accused of acting in a way that she believed was dishonest and harmful. These comments, though framed as personal opinion, were interpreted by the opposing party as defamatory, damaging to reputation, and legally actionable. The individual in question, whose name was initially kept from public court filings for privacy and safety reasons, eventually came forward and filed a defamation lawsuit against Owens, citing multiple statements she had made online. At first, the case seemed like it might not gain much traction. Many legal commentators and content creators speculated it would be difficult to prove defamation, especially in the context of U.S. free speech law and public figure protections. Some dismissed it as a long shot, others viewed it as an opportunistic move against a vocal political figure. Owens herself appeared largely unbothered, continuing to post and speak out on various platforms without directly referencing the suit for some time. But then something shifted. Behind the scenes, lawyers were preparing detailed briefs, submitting exhibits that included podcast transcripts, tweets, and even text message screenshots. Court records began to reveal a more complex narrative, one that showed the plaintiff wasn't just relying on emotional reaction, but was building a thorough and detailed legal case. The claim argued that Owens had crossed the line from protected opinion into demonstrable falsehood, statements presented as fact that caused measurable harm to career and reputation. The legal argument focused heavily on intent and impact. Was Owens deliberately trying to damage this person's name, or was she simply exercising her right to speak freely? Did her audience interpret her remarks as fact, and if so, what responsibility did she have for the consequences of that interpretation? These weren't just philosophical questions, they were legal ones, and they were now being debated by lawyers in courtrooms and experts in the media. As these filings became public, the media took notice. Suddenly, what was once a niche internet dispute became a broader cultural conversation about accountability and influence. Journalists began covering the case not just for its legal implications, but for what it represented about the future of commentary and speech in the digital age. Could a content creator be held responsible for a comment they made, even if framed as opinion led to real-world consequences? For someone else, was this a form of censorship? Or was it overdue accountability while the plaintiff began receiving support from unexpected places? Some advocacy groups and legal organizations issued statements expressing concern about the case's implications, not because they opposed Owens per se, but because they believed the lawsuit highlighted a systemic gap in how defamation works online. Unlike traditional media, online commentary can go viral within hours, spreading information or misinformation far faster than it can be corrected. And if someone's reputation is damaged in that window, what recourse do they truly have? This growing support, along with the careful legal framing of the case, gave it more weight. Suddenly, even those who had initially dismissed the suit began to reconsider. Legal experts started appearing on news panels suggesting that this could in fact become a landmark case, especially if it regressed through higher courts. The fact that Candace Owens was such a prominent figure only heightened interest, making each new court document and public statement a matter of intense public scrutiny. Throughout this time, Owens remained mostly silent on the specific legal issues. She did reference attempts to silence her and spoke broadly about being targeted for speaking the truth, but she avoided discussing the details of the case. This was likely a strategic move advised by legal counsel. After all, once a lawsuit is active, anything said publicly could become part of the official record. However, this silence also left room for speculation. Was she preparing a strong legal defense, or was she underestimating the seriousness of the case? Was the lack of response a strategy or a miscalculate? And how would the court interpret her prior statements? Once full transcripts and context were provided, these questions only fueled further debate. Commentators on both sides of the political aisle and YouTube creators began making breakdown videos of court filings, analyzing every move and predicting what might come next. It wasn't just a legal battle anymore, it had become a cultural moment with thousands of people invested in how it would unfold. And in the midst of all this, one undeniable fact remained: the person suing Owens wasn't backing down. Despite the criticism, despite the online backlash, they were pressing forward, armed with legal counsel, expert witnesses, and a very clear goal: to hold someone publicly accountable for words spoken in front of millions. As we move into the next part of this story, we'll examine exactly how that lawsuit evolved, the specific claims made, the defense presented, and the initial reactions from the media, the legal community, and the wider public. Because whether you supported Owens or questioned her from the beginning, the developments that followed painted a far more nuanced picture, one that made it clear this wasn't just a case about defamation. It was a case about power, platform, and the price of public commentary in the digital era. As the lawsuit officially took form in court, the case against Candace Owens transitioned from speculation to undeniable legal reality. The plaintiff's legal team submitted their formal complaint, a document that ran dozens of pages and outlined every aspect of their defamation claim. This was not a vague grievance or an emotional outburst. It was a detailed legal strategy grounded in precedent, complete with citations, timelines, and a clear argument that Candace Owens had crossed the line into actionable defamation. At the core of the lawsuit was the idea that Owens had made very specific claims about the plaintiff's conduct and reputation, statements that could be interpreted as fact, not opinion. In U.S. law, particularly under the First Amendment, individuals are granted broad protection when expressing opinions, especially when those opinions concern public figures or matters of public interest. However, there's a legal boundary between opinion and full statements of fact. The plaintiff's attorneys argued that Owens had not merely shared a point of view, they claimed she had falsely accused their client of unethical, damaging behavior in a manner that misled her massive audience. For example, one key section of the complaint pointed to a specific segment from Owens' podcast in which she allegedly made declarative statements about the plaintiff's motivations. and actions attributing to them things that according to the filing never occurred. These weren't questions or rhetorical musings. They were framed as known facts, and the framing the plaintiff argued misled listeners and harmed their professional standing. The legal team also pointed to Owens' social media posts, particularly on platforms like Twitter, now X, and Instagram, where captions, hashtags, and replies further reinforced her narrative. In some cases, the lawsuit highlighted how these posts were reshared by other large accounts, multiplying the reach of the claims and compounding the reputational damage. This amplification, what some legal scholars call the viral effect, has become an increasingly relevant factor in defamation suits involving public figures and online commentary. In traditional media, a damaging statement might be printed once and then corrected in the next edition. But in the digital age, a misleading comment can be reshared thousands of times before or any correction and is even attempted, and by then, the damage may already be done. Owens' legal team in response submitted a motion to dismiss, a common strategy in defamation cases, particularly when the defendant believes the lawsuit infringes on their First Amendment rights. Her lawyers argued that the statements in question were part of a broader political and cultural critique, not personal attacks designed to defame. They claimed the lawsuit was an attempt to silence a prominent voice, and that Owens was within her rights to speak out about issues she deemed important. The argument sparked immediate debate among legal analysts and online commentators. Some experts agreed that the statements might be protected speech, particularly given Owens' role as a political commentator. Others, however, noted that the specificity of her claims and the certainty with which they were delivered could make her more vulnerable to a defamation ruling. The public reaction was equally divided. Many of Owens' supporters rallied around her, echoing the claim that she was being targeted for speaking uncomfortable truths. Others were more cautious, suggesting that while free speech is essential, there must be accountability when influential figures cause real-world harm through misinformation or exaggeration. Interestingly, some of the strongest commentary came not from the political sphere, but from legal YouTubers, independent journalists, and podcast hosts who analyzed the case document by document. They broke down the filings, discussed the standards for defamation, and weighed in on whether the plaintiff had a legitimate shot at winning the case. Their consensus: this lawsuit wasn't as weak as some had initially believed. In fact, as more court filings emerged, many began to change their tune. The lawsuit had teeth. It wasn't just about punishing someone for an opinion, it was about holding a public figure accountable for alleged. Why presenting speculation as fact in ways that may have seriously harmed another individual's life and livelihood? The turning point in public perception came when a series of documents were unsealed that included internal correspondence between the plaintiff and their employer, family members, and legal advisors, all of which helped illustrate the real impact of Owens' statements. These emails and messages revealed a timeline of lost job opportunities, emotional distress, and mounting pressure from friends, colleagues, and the media, all stemming from the fallout of Owens' public commentary. At that point, even some of Owens' critics who had remained skeptical began to acknowledge the seriousness of the situation. This wasn't just a matter of feelings being hurt or reputations being bruised. The lawsuit included claims of measurable financial loss and severe personal stress. The emotional weight carried in those documents made the abstract legal arguments suddenly feel very human, very real. One notable shift occurred in the media's tone. Outlets that had initially ignored or minimized the lawsuit began giving it more prominent coverage. Headlines shifted from Owens faces defamation claim to Candace Owens sued over potentially damaging falsehoods, a small but telling change that reflected growing recognition of the case's potential impact. Meanwhile, Owens maintained her composure in public appearances. While she still didn't directly address the specifics of the case, she made subtle references to being under attack for telling the truth and standing up against what she called politically motivated attempts to intimidate dissent. She continued her podcast, posted regularly in social media, and even joked during one interview that some people just can't handle reality. B. At behind-the-scenes legal, analysts noted that her defense team was making a number of strategic adjustments. There was a notable change in tone between her initial public dismissals of the case and the more recent legal filings, which struck a more measured, cautious note. It seemed clear that Owens and her team were taking the lawsuit more seriously than before. Around this time, a number of online personalities who had previously criticized the lawsuit also began reevaluating their stance. Some issued clarifying statements on their platforms admitting they may have jumped to conclusions before reviewing the evidence. Others released full-length videos revisiting the original allegations and acknowledging that the plaintiff's argument was far more compelling than originally assumed. This wave of reconsideration sparked the now viral phrase associated with the case, "You were right, I was wrong." It became a kind of shorthand for those who initially downplayed the lawsuit but later came to see its merit. Some of these apologies were genuine, others felt performative, but all of them contributed to a growing consensus the case deserved attention, respect, and serious scrutiny. Legal experts noted that this shift in public sentiment could influence the case's outcome, especially if it were to proceed to trial. While judges and juries are instructed to consider only the evidence and legal arguments, the reality is that public perception can and shape everything from media coverage to the willingness of witnesses to come forward. If Owens was perceived as acting recklessly or without regard for the truth, that perception could carry weight in a courtroom, particularly if the plaintiff's attorneys were able to illustrate a clear pattern of behavior. At the same time, defenders of Owens continued to argue that the lawsuit was dangerous not because the facts were irrelevant, but because of the precedent it might set. Could political commentators or cultural critics be held legally liable for statements that upset or offend others? Where was the line between criticism and defamation, especially in a world where media platforms blur the boundary between journalism and opinion? These are complicated questions, and there are no easy answers. But what became clear in part 2 of this saga was that the defamation case against Candace Owens was no longer something to be ignored or ridiculed. It had become a legitimate legal battle grounded in hard evidence, real consequences, and high-stakes implications. As the legal filings grew more detailed and public reaction began to intensify, a noticeable shift occurred not just in the media narrative, but in how everyday viewers, followers, and even fellow creators spoke about the lawsuit. Suddenly, Candace Owens, once seen as confidently in control of her messaging, was now surrounded by a growing atmosphere of caution, skepticism, and even discomfort. It wasn't just about what she had said, it was about how her words were now being interpreted in light of the hard evidence brought forth in court. For months, Owens' brand had been built on the idea of being unapologetically outspoken. Her supporters admired her for saying things others wouldn't, often framing her as fearless in the face of criticism. But as new revelations emerged, particularly the timeline of how the plaintiff's life had reportedly been impacted emotionally, professionally, and socially, people started asking a different kind of question. Was this really about free speech, or was it about responsibility? One of the most surprising developments came not from the legal teams, but from the online community. Commentators who had initially mocked or dismissed the lawsuit began posting updates, reactions, and in some cases, full retractions of their earlier opinions. Titles like "Okay, I was wrong about this lawsuit," and "Why I've changed my mind about Candace Owens' case" began appearing across YouTube, TikTok, and podcasts. The phrase that echoed over and over in these posts was simple: "You were right, I was wrong." It became more than just an admission. It turned into a cultural checkpoint, a phrase that captured a growing sense of reflection within the digital content world. Creators who once treated the situation like a joke were now recognizing the depth and potential consequences of Owens' statements. And it wasn't just about this one case. It raised broader questions about how fast we form opinions, how little time we spend examining facts, and how easy it is to amplify narratives without accountability. This shift was also fueled by how well organized and factual the plaintiff's team appeared in their filings. Unlike other celebrity or influencer lawsuits that rely on emotional appeals or vague claims, this case had structure. It had exhibits, timelines, statements from colleagues, and even industry experts who backed up the claim that reputational damage had occurred. The professionalism of the approach gave it credibility, and with that came a change in tone from even the harshest skeptics. Meanwhile, Owens continued posting her regular content, commenting on national issues, social trends, and political controversies, but noticeably avoided any in-depth acknowledgement of the case itself. This selective silence raised eyebrows. Some interpreted it as discipline advised by her legal team, while others began to see it as evasive.
In a media landscape where authenticity and transparency are increasingly valued, silence can sometimes speak louder than words. And for her critics, that silence was enough to confirm their concerns. They began asking why someone so committed to speaking truth to power was suddenly so careful about what she would and wouldn't say. After all, if the lawsuit truly had no merit, why not confront it directly and defend herself in the same public forum where the original statements were made? That's when another layer of analysis began to emerge: the disconnect between online commentary and real-world consequences. Legal experts pointed out that many influencers don't fully grasp how defamation law works until it's too late. While U.S. law protects a great deal of speech, it does not allow for knowingly false claims that harm others. The moment a statement shifts from opinion to verifiable fact, the legal risks increase dramatically. Commentators began using Owens' case as a warning not just to high-profile names, but to the growing number of smaller creators, influencers, and podcasters who emulate the shock value style of online discourse. If someone as experienced and established as Candace Owens could find herself in this position, it meant the rules weren't as loose as many assumed. At the same time, Owens still had defenders. Many of them viewed the backlash as performative, a wave of content creators backpedaling not because of genuine reflection, but because they were afraid of aligning themselves with someone who might soon lose a lawsuit. These supporters argued that the legal process hadn't played out yet and that everyone deserved the presumption of innocence until a verdict was reached. That's a fair point, and it underscores just how polarized the reaction had become. On one side, you had those saying this case was about long overdue accountability for the digital age. On the other, you had those who believed it was a dangerous overreach, a test of how far powerful institutions would go to punish unpopular opinions. Still, what couldn't be denied was how powerful the court of public opinion had become. Even without a verdict, reputational shifts were already happening. Owens had been a dominant voice online for years, but now there was a new tone in the way people spoke about her. It wasn't outrage or celebration, it was uncertainty. People weren't sure what to believe anymore, and that's perhaps the most damaging development of all. That feeling, the growing doubt, the hesitancy to defend or dismiss too quickly, is what made this chapter of the story so significant. It marked a moment where digital audiences, known for being quick to take sides, actually paused. They reconsidered, they questioned themselves, and many of them chose to say openly and on record, "I got it wrong." That kind of humility is rare in online spaces. And whether you support Candace Owens or not, the shift in public tone says something important about where we're headed next: a digital world where accountability isn't just about being sued or winning in court, but about facing the people who once supported you and realizing that the narrative has changed. As we reach the end of this evolving story, one thing is clear: the Candace Owens defamation lawsuit has become much more than a legal case. It's a mirror not just for Owens, but for all of us who participate in today's digital discourse. Whether you're a viewer, a commentator, or someone who simply browses social media for news and opinion, this case reminds us that words have weight and influence carries consequences. Candace Owens built her brand on fearless commentary, on refusing to back down, and on speaking with unwavering certainty. For her audience, that made her a symbol of strength in a chaotic and politically charged world. But this lawsuit revealed the other side of that coin. What happens when confidence veers into assumption and when opinion begins to blur with assertion? The legal argument wasn't just about whether what she said was wrong, but about whether it was presented in a way that caused real damage to another person's life. That distinction matters. We live in a time when the lines between journalism, entertainment, activism, and commentary are increasingly blurred. People consume podcasts, TikToks, YouTube videos, and Instagram posts as sources of information, often without checking the facts. That puts incredible responsibility on content creators, especially those with massive platforms. And this lawsuit serves as a powerful reminder that influence without accountability can become dangerous. What's perhaps most striking about the public's reaction isn't just the support or the outrage, it's the reconsideration. Thousands of people, including many creators, came forward and said something rarely heard in online spaces: "I was wrong." That kind of humility is hard to come by, especially when reputations and followings are on the line. But it's a sign that audiences are evolving. They're looking deeper. They're questioning what they're told, and they're willing to change their minds when the facts demand it. Candace Owens is still a major figure, and this lawsuit may not define her entire career, but it will be a turning point, a moment that exposed the gap between narrative and truth, between bold speech and careful responsibility. The final outcome of the case remains to be seen, but its impact is already being felt. No matter where you stand politically or personally, this story is a valuable lesson. Free speech is powerful, but when it's weaponized, even unintentionally, it can cause real harm. And in a world where a single sentence can reach millions within seconds, the responsibility to get it right has never been greater. This isn't just about Candace Owens. It's about how we talk to each other, how we talk about each other, and how we move forward in a digital landscape that's still writing its own rules. The real question now is, are we willing to learn, or are we doomed to repeat the same mistakes?